You will witness a miracle.
Heretic is the newest religious horror flick to hit theaters. It's directed by Scott Beck and Brian Woods. And just a quick second, if you like religious horror films, you've been eating good this year because we got Longlegs, The First Omen, and now Heretic, and all three have just knocked it out of the park when it comes to religious horror. The film stars Hugh Grant as Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed has requested information on the Church of Latter-day Saints. And not just information, but he has requested that he receives a house visit from some people from the Church of Latter-day Saints. And that is where our story begins, because Sister Barnes, played by Sophie Thatcher, and Sister Paxton, played by Chloe East, both show up at Mr. Reed's door at the beginning of this film. And what they don't realize is that once they step inside of this house, they are now playing a very deadly, sinister game. And that is the most setup that I can give you for this film, because I do not want to spoil anything for you. There will be no spoilers going forward, so if you're here for spoilers, you didn't find it here. I will, of course, give you positives and negatives about the film here in a minute, but they will be as spoiler-free as possible. If this is the first time you're finding my channel, I would love for you to hit that subscribe button. Check out all of the different content on my channel. If you love religious horror films, well, I've covered both Longlegs and First Omen on this channel as well, so you can go check out those videos. With that said, let's get into my positives and some of my negatives. My first positive for this movie is the acting across the board. Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East do a great job, but it is Hugh Grant that is far and away the shining star of this movie. His incredibly witty dialogue mixed with the sense of dread, because you know that he's absolutely up to no good, and then you see him do some very disturbing things to these girls. And in this film, you really get the sense that Mr. Reed is real, that he's a real live person, that he is a real character. Hugh Grant brings that Mr. Reed to life. And while it is terrifying for most of the film and you want these girls to succeed, you want Mr. Reed to lose this deadly game, I think that he does such a great job bringing out that character. In my opinion, this is Hugh Grant's best work, and I absolutely love listening to him monologue. I could listen to him monologue all day, and you're pretty much doing this movie. So if you like listening to Hugh Grant talk throughout an entire film, this is going to be the movie for you. My next positive for this movie is the pacing. I think that this movie is paced out very well, and for being such a heavy dialogue-driven film, it's interesting that it keeps that pace throughout the movie, because I feel like a movie with this much dialogue could be dragged down and really slow the pacing down. But because the dialogue is so witty, the dialogue is so entertaining, whether it's terrifying or not, it keeps that steady pace and it keeps you in suspense for this whole movie, which leads into my next positive. This movie finds a way to keep the viewer engaged and invested in this story. If you have any sort of religious background, I feel like you yourself are trying to make arguments against Mr. Reed. Or if you're on the other side of the spectrum and you have arguments against both Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton, it's keeping you engaged and it's feeding you just enough to keep you at the edge of your seat. Which will lead me over to my last positive for this film, and that is probably my biggest positive for this film, and that this is a religious horror film that does not pick a side. While Hugh Grant's character of Mr. Reed is a very terrible person, what he's saying tends to make sense throughout the film, and what Sister Paxton and Sister Barnes are saying also makes sense throughout the film. So this film is a religious horror film that doesn't anger either side, or at least that's how I saw it. I didn't feel like either side could get angry, because you were really going up against two different ideologies at the same time, but you weren't upsetting the audience. Yes, Mr. Reed is a bad person. In this film, you see that he's done horrible things. So he himself is a bad person, but not necessarily his beliefs, or not necessarily part of his beliefs. Some of his beliefs, they're bad. Somebody's going to get me in the comment section for that. But my point I'm trying to make here is that I appreciate that this film, as a religious horror film, called it right down the middle for the majority of the movie. There's even a scene towards the end, and I said no spoilers earlier, so I'm going to be really careful here, but a scene involving a butterfly at the very end of the movie, which could prove Sister Paxton was correct in her religious beliefs the entire time. But with something they do with that scene, it's very possible that she was not correct the entire time. And I loved how this movie just sort of left that in the balance and left that up to the viewers to decide. That'll lead me over to my negatives, and my first negative for this movie is a character arc direction for Sister Paxton that I didn't completely buy into. So I'm trying to be spoiler free here, and I guess what I'll say is that Chloe East's character in this movie is a very religious person, and so the movie tests her religion throughout this film. But Sophie Thatcher's character of Sister Barnes is a very religious person, but you can see she doesn't buy into absolutely everything. You can see she's a little bit of an outsider in her own church, and I think the movie might have played a little better had Sister Barnes been put through the ringer like Sister Paxton ends up being put through. And again, maybe it's just her character arc. We can chalk it up to that in this film. It's like, oh, she's really proving her faith. And then when you see that end with the butterfly, which I did like, it kind of throws it up in the air. Was she right? Was she wrong? Was Mr. Reed right? Was he wrong? It kind of leaves that for the viewer, and I appreciated that. But I think maybe, and maybe I'm not explaining myself well enough here, but I think maybe that Sister Barnes, had she gone through sort of the end moments of this movie that Sister Paxton ended up going through, it might have played a little better for me, because as it stands, it was like, oh no, Sister Paxton already believes, and yes, her faith is being tested, but I feel like it could have been better if Sister Barnes had her faith tested. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I need to watch it a second time. It's just really a gripe more than a full-on negative, this is terrible, like that's not how I feel. I just feel like it could have played possibly a little better, and maybe that's something that I'll take back on a repeat viewing, or maybe a repeat viewing will enforce that in the future. And my other negative for this movie is going to be the way Mr. Reed's plan sort of comes together throughout this film. Some of it feels very convenient, and don't get me wrong, some of it feels very thought out, some of it feels like, wow, this guy is actually a sinister mastermind, but there's moments in this movie, and I'll just reference one of them, where there's a knock at the door, and that knock at the door creates a distraction, and that distraction gives Mr. Reed the upper hand in the game. But if you've seen the movie, you know that that knock in the door could not have been predicted by Mr. Reed. There's no way he could have known there was going to be that knock at the door. So how would he have gotten the upper hand? Maybe he had another sinister way of like twisting and making the girls think they were seeing something different. Maybe he had a way to distract them. But with what I personally saw, he could not have predicted somebody would have come and knocked on his door looking for both Sister Paxton and Sister Barnes. And because of that distraction, he's able to get that upper hand in the game. And I didn't buy into that at all. That felt way too convenient. There's other things throughout the movie, but they would be spoilery. I just feel like some of his sinister plan really comes together based on convenience. But just like my previous negative, maybe on a second viewing, some of these negatives would be reinforced, or maybe they would just kind of fall apart. So I'm not sure if that'll stay a negative either. That might turn into a gripe where it's just like, that was a little convenient. But overall, I had a really good time with this film. It's one I would highly recommend to everybody to check out. It is playing in theaters right now as of this recording, so I would recommend that you check out Heretic in theaters. If you can't check it out in theaters, definitely check it out when it comes to streaming, especially if you like religious horror. I think this will be right up your alley. But those are just my opinions, because that's my review for Heretic. Guys, if you had a chance to see this film yet, if you have, let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know why you liked it, why you didn't like it. Maybe we agree or disagree on some things. I would love to know all of your comments in the comment section. And finally, guys, if you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button, because it helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Alright guys, we got to the end of my Heretic review. I'm actually really looking forward to a second viewing of this film now. There's just so much that I feel like I didn't take in, and I was trying to absorb so much during this film. So I'm looking forward to it again. I will try to watch it in theaters one more time. If not, as soon as it is on 4K, it's going on those shelves back there, and I'll definitely be checking it out again. With that said, if you want to check out any of the other content on my channel, well, I've got all of my horror movie reviews right there, and I've got all of my 2024 movie reviews right there.